Hello, and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm David Foote, your host for today. I'm chair of the local chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, and I'm here speaking with Dick Franke, who taught anthropology, and Barbara Chasin, who taught sociology, both at Montclair State University in New Jersey. The reason we're talking today is they both are subject matter experts on the state of Kerala in India, and some of the interesting history there. There's been some incredible reforms, as I understand, instituted in the communities of the state beginning in the mid-1990s. So you both have been studying Kerala for years and have been there as well. Can you tell me a little about how you began studying the movement there and what your experiences were visiting the region? When did you first go?
Okay, we will tell you. We first went in 1986. Let me give you a little bit of background on why we went there at all, because it's relevant to the rest of what we're going to be saying. Before going to Kerala, we had done research either together or separately in other third world countries. And in our classes at Montclair State, we had taught about conditions in third world countries, most of it very poor conditions. Dick had written his dissertation on the Green Revolution in Indonesia, which had been touted as a solution to the world's hunger problem. But he found that in spite of its promises, inequality had deepened and there were serious environmental problems as a result of the Green Revolution. So that wasn't very cheerful. Then together in 1980, we did research on a famine. We started doing research on a famine that had occurred in the Sahel region of West Africa. The famine itself had started in the 1970s. Late 60s and went on for quite a while. The Sahel region, just to put it in so people know what we're talking about, it's just below the Sahara Desert, an ecozone. It had formerly, the countries we were studying when the famine occurred had mostly been controlled by the French. And we found in our research that colonial policies and post-colonial development strategies had exacerbated all of the problems that existed there. So that when in the 1970s, late 60s, a drought occurred, which lasted for several years, it triggered a famine which had really been brought about by these social and political conditions. So we were studying and talking about places that were not very hopeful. And we were looking for something that offered a different kind of strategy, especially to talk to our students so that we weren't always telling them about how terrible everything was and how there was sort of no hope. So then we learned about Kerala, where left-wing social movements led by what is called the Communist Party Marxist had led to a series of successful social movements. And then when Kerala became a state in independent India, it became a state in 1957, the Communist Party had leadership. This may be a little confusing. There's more than one Communist Party in India, and one of them is called the Communist Party Marxist, another is called the major Communist Party is called the Communist Party of India. So it's the Communist Party Marxist there. We first went in 1986 and we lived in a village for several months, for 8 months. We looked at how the reforms that had occurred, which we'll talk more about, had impacted on people's lives. And then after we had lived in the village, we returned several times to Kerala, looking especially at the economic cooperatives there and what's called decentralized participatory planning, which we will also talk more about. So that's why we went and where we were. And we'll talk more about what we saw and what the achievements of Kerala are.
That's great. So you mentioned this participatory planning and budgeting, as well as worker cooperatives. In my own reading, sort of to prepare for this conversation, I was seeing these trends of like strong radical equality as part of their political and economic structures that they developed very intentionally. What were the roles of workers, of poor people, and others who had previously been left out of the political process?
Well, once the Communist Party Marxist was in power, and even before it was in power, and one of the reasons it was elected in a democratic election to the highest political offices in the state, they had been supporting and continued to, and still continue to support mass movements. And as a result of those movements, they were able in Kerala to create a very significant land reform where tenancy was abolished. So what this meant was that the former high caste landlords were no longer able to collect rent from their tenants. And this also meant not only did they not collect rent, which added to people's income, but they couldn't threaten them with eviction if people did not follow the landlord's wishes. So their political power was considerably diminished, as well as increasing people's income and giving former tenants land on which they could now grow crops just for themselves, their family, maybe to sell. Another consequence of this, which has to do with equality, is that instead of being landlords living off other people's labor, the former mostly high caste landlords now became productive members of society. They became teachers, government administrators, cultural workers, and they still had some land of their own, so they became farmers as well. But they couldn't exploit other people as they had been doing, which is crucial. And then a number of other social reforms were instituted, including school feeding programs, pensions for agricultural laborers, more available health care. And as a result of these reforms, and we have a screenshot here which can show you, I think, if it can show you.
All right.
Get it up there. I'll summarize what it'll say, and then you'll see the data. Kerala achieved very high literacy rates, a high life expectancy. Now you can see where Kerala is in the southwestern.
Well, we'll start at the bottom.
Okay, so this compares Kerala to other parts of India, to other low-income countries, and to the United States. And what you can see is that Kerala's per capita income is much, much lower than our own. But you can see that its adult literacy is nearly that of the United States and much greater than the rest of India and other low-income countries. The life expectancy is excellent. If we had life expectancy and infant mortality by race, which in the United States makes a huge difference in how long people live, and infant mortality rates, the contrast would be even sharper, with Kerala doing better than African Americans on average in the United States. But even that aside, you can see how close they are to us as a very wealthy country, and they're not particularly wealthy at all. Later, we'll talk about how Kerala has done in terms of the pandemic. It's done very well, relatively speaking. So we lived in a village, and then we came back several times, as we indicated, and always found it to be a remarkable place, very different from other parts of India that we have visited. So I hope that answers.
Yes, thank you. So they instituted these reforms. They brought people into the political process, democratized a lot of their decision-making. How's that sort of, what's the legacy of it over time? How has their longstanding presence in the region led to a change in how people see their own role in government or the expectations they have of politicians?
So to try to kind of continue the story here a little bit, by the late 1980s, Kerala had carried out substantial reforms such as the land reform and the other public reforms that Barbara just spoke about, and based partly on the fact that they had a very highly mobilized population, what's sometimes called in social science civil society or in economic development literature is called non-governmental organizations. Um, One of the most important was an organization called the People's Science Movement, which was a movement made up of scientists from Kerala who started out by translating scientific books and articles from English into the local language, Malayalam, which is mentioned here on the section, just for those of you who are interested. And they were able to establish a large number of people who participated in taking ideas of scientific thinking into the rural areas. And they became very energized, and they had begun reading about decentralization of centralized power, which may sound unusual for a communist party. But they did become very interested in launching a campaign to see if they could decentralize the development policies in the villages so that the energy of the people who had been fighting for land reform and agriculture labor pensions and other things like that, could they take that energy and use it to build the rural economy? So they organized groups of people, various kinds of study groups, and they actually built up a plan of what to do. And in 1995, they won the state assembly elections again. Remember, Barbara had mentioned it in 1957, they became one of the first elected communist state governments in the world. They had been exchanging with the Congress Party. One would win one election and the other would win the other. But when they won the elections in 1995, they decided to launch this campaign, and they connected it with the National Indian Ninth Five-Year Plan, which itself was somewhat modeled off of the Soviet Union historically. But in any case, they launched this campaign, and they were able to mobilize over 3 million people out of a population then of about 30 million. It's now 35 million people. So when Kerala is called a small state, keep that in mind. Anyway, they were able to set in motion very powerful forces of citizen engagement. So first they organized what are called Grama Sabhas, or village assemblies. And this is a key element of the People's Campaign, the decentralized campaign. And they offered up to 40% of the state's development budget could be determined by people who attended these assemblies. The assemblies are very much like what's called participatory budgeting, which I think has been talked about here in Ithaca. It's also very famous in Brazil, where the Brazilian Workers' Party has carried out a similar program. And in South Africa, the ANC had done some work along these lines right around the time at the end of apartheid. It hasn't gone quite as well, but in any case, they followed this up with having each one of the 941 villages and approximately 200 other local cities and towns. Each one of these units wrote a self-history in their own language, although a few of them also produced it in English. They studied their own problems. They organized working groups. They drafted projects. They estimated how much the cost would be of these projects, and they prioritized them in the village and in other village assemblies. And within about 9 months, they had conducted the first year of this campaign. And the results of this campaign were really amazing. There was way more schools improved, public facilities of all kinds. One example that's, I think, very significant is that in the market areas, women would typically have a lot of trouble finding a place to relieve themselves. So one of the things that happened as a result of this campaign was that they built public restrooms for both genders in almost all of the marketplaces that didn't have them. And since then, they've completed that job, and they also extended the idea of every family having a sanitary latrine and safe drinking water. They haven't completely achieved the drinking water thing, but in 2016, they actually built the last sanitary latrine. Every single public building and every single house in Kerala now has a sanitary place for defecation and urination. And it all kind of grew out of the energy of these campaigns that started, like I said, in 1996.
Let me just add,
Yeah.
this is a very small, but I think it's a significant point. These reports that were done weren't just dry pieces of writing. The local artists in the villages contributed to them. So there was this great variety of sort of cultural input, varying from village to village, along with the descriptions of their problems and ideas about what they wanted to have happen. And, you know, people could read what was going on in other villages and see where they shared problems and where they had ideas that could be used. It was a really, we sat in on some of these meetings, and they were very long. People really stuck it out, and we've all been in political discussions, but they were engaged and interested, and it was about their lives. It made a big difference.
All right, yeah, so you talked about the history of the region, and we know now that India has elected a fairly far-right person at the top level of government. In the response to the COVID crisis, I understand there's a big contrast now between the way that the overall India government has handled it and the communists in Kerala. So can you talk a little bit about their response to the pandemic? What has made their response effective?
Okay. As you said, India has a very far-right government, very authoritarian. And when they did announce a lockdown, they actually sent police out in most of the states, and they beat a lot of people up. And their idea was to essentially terrorize the population into the lockdown. By contrast, in Kerala, even those people who don't support the left-wing candidates, they feel fairly confident that the government is friendly to them. And so in Kerala, it was much easier to get people to go inside and stay inside. And also, they realized that that was not the only problem, because once people are in a lockdown situation, it's hard for them to get food and so forth. So they used their skill of mass mobilization and drew upon the organizations that already existed, that had been active in helping to carry out the People's Campaign, and turned them into giant volunteer organizations that are providing services to people who are kind of stuck inside their homes. And this includes bringing them food. They organized essentially a big volunteer corps of food delivery people. And that has attracted a lot of interest in some of the Western media. So they've been able to fairly successfully keep the virus under control. They also moved very quickly because of the fact that they could ask people to quarantine themselves, and people were very cooperative. So things happened quickly. And in addition to that, they have a very extensive public health system. Although there's lots of criticisms that you can make of any institution. And so I don't want to make it sound like everything is perfect there. But compared to the rest of the country, in Kerala, the public hospitals really function. The primary healthcare centers, which go all the way down to the village level, every single one of them, and there are tens of thousands of these health centers in Kerala, and every one of them has at least one qualified MD working at least 40 hours. And many of them are have staff all night. Some of them have 3 to 6 hospital beds. They're really mini hospitals. And they have the ability to carry out programs such as inoculations, education programs. They'll send some of the health center workers to the schools to give talks to the students. So they're very connected to the rest of the society. And so carrying out public health programs in Kerala, it already has kind of a head start. I wouldn't want to predict that they can totally control this nasty virus, but so far they've actually been in the same league with Singapore and New Zealand, a few other places, but I think for slightly different reasons.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's sort of a combination of a very strong healthcare system, comparatively, people's trust in their government, and then the government actually responding with providing for their needs, like things we've been asking for here.
I think I think you're seeing in Kerala, they have a history of actually making their government officials go to work. They invented something called the Jarao, where if a doctor didn't come to work at the health clinic, or a nurse or some other really important needed person was not there when the primary health center opened in the morning, within 2 hours there'd be a crowd of 100 people surrounding that person's house and saying, "You must come to work." It was a nonviolent activity, but after it became fairly well known, then it got to being used more and more, and eventually it wasn't needed. I will say though, just to keep it on the record, I mean, they have a lot of the same health problems that you find in other low-income areas. People have, there's a lot of asthma and breathing problems because you have dirt roads, which is a problem during the dry season. And they still have some infectious diseases, but on the whole, Kerala has the same kind of disease pattern that you find in the rich countries now. They live longer and they die of heart attacks or cancer, but they don't die young from infection or malnutrition.
And relevant to that is the fact that they have a very low, relatively speaking, infant mortality rate, as the data we showed earlier indicated. And because of that, I mean, in many countries, poor countries where the infant mortality rate is high, people can't know if their children will live, and many of them won't. But when the infant mortality rate goes down and people have confidence in the healthcare system, they have much less of a need to have large families. And so the average family size in Kerala is not that much different from in rich countries. And that's better for everybody in many ways. It's certainly better for women who don't undergo multiple births. It's certainly better for the children who live, and people can feel good about that, about knowing that children are going to survive.
And since you brought up the question of women in the development programs, I'd like to mention that Kerala invented a program. It's called Kudumbashri, which means family prosperity. And it started in one of the poorest districts in Kerala, where more than 50% of the population is below the local poverty line, which would be down in the World Bank zone of, you know, a couple dollars a day, miserably poor people. And they organized a mass movement to come out of poverty. And it's been fairly successful. The organization has 4.3 million members out of a total population of 35 million people. And it's found all across the state. They do a kind of combination of Marx and Gandhi. So they try to organize cooperatives that are run by the workers themselves, but they primarily produce local products. So this idea of village self-sufficiency, which they got from Gandhi and very consciously have from him. So they manufacture various kinds of low-tech products with local materials, and they sell them to the local market. And it's a kind of bootstrapping process that slowly brings people up out of poverty. So they have soap making cooperatives, umbrella making cooperatives. They make a few sort of low-level electronic devices, school uniforms, and the people who manufacture these things actually own these co-ops themselves, and they're made up 100% of women, and they totally self-manage this. This Kudumba Shri program, which has now been running for about 18 years, has actually won several United Nations awards and is touted, in kind of international development circles as an example of what you can do basically without any foreign aid, which obviously also comes sometimes with strings attached. Yes,
This is
there's
an
the
example
Mari
of the-
soap. Yes, we
Very nice.
saw them make that soap. Yeah, and it turns out that soap is very easy to make. So and they don't usually package it. They do for selling it in other parts of the country, but they carry it house to house in little baskets, so they don't have to buy those cardboard boxes, and they don't have to have any advertising because they're selling to their neighbors who already know they're doing it.
And one other aspect of this is they're not giving money to multinational corporations who are not part of the local economy. And that's a selling point that they're conscious of and that they talk about.
Very interesting.
Mm.
I think we're about at the end of our time for today. So we didn't really get a chance to talk over like international solidarity lessons to take from it, but I would encourage anyone listening to look up the state of Kerala, do some reading about both the history in the region and their current programs that are really helping people a lot. Yes, so thank you, Dick. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Wow.
This has been Ithaca DSA Presents with your host, David Foote. If you want to know more about the local chapter, you can find us at ithacadsa.org or on Facebook. Just search for Ithaca Democratic Socialists of America. And the national organization you can find at dsausa.org. Thank you.